Well, welcome again to the second in our two-part series on being faithful to a forgiving Christ in an unfair world. This is our attempt to look at this whole concept of forgiveness and what it means in our life as Christians. So I welcome you back to this second installment. I want to begin now with looking at the reasons why forgiveness can be such difficult emotional work. There's several reasons. One, it can involve people who are dead. Some of the people that we need to extend forgiveness to are frankly beyond this world. They've died. This can be parents. It could be loved ones who ended their lives in suicide. It can be anyone who needs our forgiveness but who is no longer in the land of the living, let us say. With our parents, most of us need to forgive parents for reasons big or small. But in so doing, we need to remember that, number one, no one is perfect. And my experience is that most of our parents did the best they could do given their upbringings. And unfortunately, the best they could do is sometimes not as good as we needed it to be. Nonetheless, we still can forgive our loved ones and our parents who have died. I remember once a parishioner came to me needing to forgive a father who had died. And I gave him a simple recipe. Go to the cemetery, stand over his grave, and tell him how you feel. And when it's done, forgive him and let it go. And do you know? He did, and he felt free. Sometimes forgiveness is difficult because the people who caused us harm are simply out of our touch or beyond our reach. We don't know where they are. And sometimes we just don't really want to find out where they are or to really be in touch with them, where they're not a part of our lives anymore. And that can be difficult. This could be a former friend, a person who hurt you and then the relationship was severed and you just sort of lost contact. It could be a parent that you are pretty sure is still alive, but who abandoned you and your family. A parent who perhaps got into drugs or alcohol and went on their way. It could be a parent who gave you up for adoption. But you still can work at the difficult task of forgiveness with people who have died or people who are no longer present. Sometimes it's hard to forgive because the people that need your forgiveness just don't care. They have no sense of responsibility, no accountability, there's no guilt, there's no remorse, there's no regret. And that could happen whether the injury is very small or really huge. And then you ask the question, well, why bother? If they have no regret, if they don't care, why should I bother to work at this task of forgiveness? Why should I forgive the unrepentant? Primarily because it's for the health of our own soul, the health of our own soul. And I'll say more about that in a moment. Sometimes the work of forgiveness is difficult because it involves ourselves. Sometimes we need to forgive ourselves for a wrong that we perpetrated on someone else. I like the way one author put this: releasing the person we are now from the shadow and the weight of the wrong we did in the past and for which we feel great regret and remorse. Forgiving ourselves, releasing the person that we are now, the person that we have become, from the shadow and the weight of the wrong that we did in the past. Sometimes we have to forgive ourselves. And sometimes I think that requires truth and honesty. Truth and honesty about the wrong. We have to come to terms with what we did. and how it hurt someone else, the impact of the wound that we caused. And I think sometimes the hurt that our hearts have the most difficulty forgiving is the unfair harm that we perpetrated on other people. Sometimes I think that we just need to have a good memory. We have to be honest. And that will begin to set our souls on the right path. We know that we've done wrong, and we deeply regret it, and that is good. That's a sign of forgiveness when we regret something we did, when we have remorse, when we feel guilt. That, I believe, means the grace of God is at work in our souls. But simply remaining on that path of feeling unforgiven and feeling terrible, that can rob us of the joy, peace, and the freedom that can lead to self-respect that we need. If we stay on that path, it could lead to our own self-destructive behavior. I know in cases where it's led to suicide. I also know for certain that sometimes staying on that path of guilt, of not forgiving ourselves, leads a person into sickness, sometimes what are known as somatoform sicknesses that have no origin organically, and yet we're very sick and ill. So it's important that we forgive ourselves and we be honest with what we've done. And then, I think, as Christians, we call out for the saving help of God. The saving help of God. Who else is going to forgive us for something that perhaps we only know about? But also, forgiving ourselves sometimes means overcoming another obstacle, and that is the people who don't think we should be forgiven or that we should forgive ourselves. Very often, those are people who are very self-righteous, and they do not want remorseful, repentant sinners like ourselves to forgive ourselves. They want us to stay unforgiven and bound up in that misery, because I believe they themselves are bound up in that kind of unforgiveness. I think also, in order to forgive ourselves and to forgive others, we need good, life-giving theology, good, life-giving and sustaining theology. And I believe that is why Jesus and why his path of forgiveness of sins and the goodness and graciousness of God is so very important. Remember that Jesus proclaimed this saving God who cares, this God who wants us to live in joy and peace with ourselves. This is the good news that Jesus brought, and that's the good news we need to hang on to when we have to forgive ourselves. God forgives us, and that is a part and parcel on the way to forgiving ourselves. I do not know how people who have no faith at all of any kind, how they come to that place of forgiveness. I don't understand that. Sometimes the work of forgiveness is very, very difficult because of really brutal people who did monstrous, terrible things to us. This is sometimes, I think, maybe the most difficult kind of thing to forgive. It often is a very, very long process. It is not an overnight thing. Sometimes it takes one's entire life to be working at this issue. This does not mean that we declare them innocent, for they are not innocent. They are guilty. But it does mean for us letting go of our hatred, letting go of our desire to return the pain that we experienced on them and make them live as victims. We need to let that go. We need to see them as children of a gracious God, but not necessarily innocent of what they did. And for me, it's also a realization that we need to be honest about ourselves and perhaps any part that we played in one of these issues where forgiveness needs to be given. Sometimes the only thing that really truly led me to a place of forgiveness was being honest with myself in the situation and realizing the part that I played, and that very rarely have I been entirely innocent and free of responsibility. And when you start to get honest with yourself and realize, yes, I had a part in all of that. That person who hurt me also received pain and hurt from me, and I had a part to play in it. So if I too am guilty, then that hopefully will help us to forgive others. And sometimes the work of forgiveness can be really, really difficult because it involves forgiving God. Forgiving God for the unfairness that we cannot pin on someone else. The unfairness that we experience, the pain we experience in the world that we cannot pin on someone else. And there's all sorts of ways this manifests. All sorts of ways. And we say, well, why should we forgive God? Because the Lord is just in all of his ways and kind in all of his doings. Who are we to forgive God? God should not be feeling sorry or guilty, remorseful for anything God has done. But maybe God understands this. Our ways and our understanding are not like God's. So maybe God does not get all hot and bothered and offended if we have to set ourselves free from anger and disappointment and resentment by forgiving God, extending forgiveness to God for the unfairness and the pain that we experience that we simply can't blame on anybody else. I have in mind here, for example, couples who wanted to be parents but never conceived a child. Parents who lose children to crib death or accidents and wonder why God did not intervene or stop it from happening. Faithful people who come to forgive and love and serve the God who did not answer their earnest prayers to become heterosexual. How about creative, artistic, gifted, maybe athletic people who come to terms with the ordinariness of their lives and find deep satisfaction despite the fact that they did not quite become the superstars that they thought they were. And so they forgive God. And finally, I've known many a soul who find peace only after they let go of their God-directed resentment for things like chronic illnesses or terminal illnesses. And they forgive God in the end. They come to praise the God who gave them life, even though their life is challenged by a chronic illness or they are dying before they ever wanted to. And so they forgive God. And I believe that God accepts that and heals. So those are some of the reasons why it can be so difficult to forgive and why the work of forgiveness can be so challenging. Now I want to address how it is that people do forgive. Some of the things involved in this often slow road to forgiveness. I want to read just a couple of sentences from Lou Smead's book, Forgiving and Forgetting. He said, "Forgiving is love's revolution against life's unfairness. When we forgive, we ignore the normal laws that strap us to the natural law of getting even. And by the alchemy of love, we release ourselves from our own painful pasts. We fly over a dues-paying morality in order to create a new future out of the past's unfairness. We free ourselves from the wrong that is locked into our private histories. We unshackle our spirits from malice, and maybe if we are lucky, we also restore a relationship that would otherwise have been lost forever. Forgiving is one of God's miracles that few of us have the magic to perform easily. So how do we forgive? First of all, it can take a long time, and that's okay. Sometimes the work of forgiveness takes a long, long time because the pain is really, really deep. The wound was very serious. And just like in the physical body, with the emotional body and the soul, sometimes those kinds of wounds take a long time to heal. And sometimes, as I mentioned before, it takes us a long time to realize our part in the hurt. I can remember staying angry and unforgiving for years because I would not come to terms with the part I played in the debacle. Friends, we are rarely always completely innocent. When we finally get honest and take the responsibility for whatever unfair past that we played or unfair part that we played, we start this work of forgiveness, and we slowly let go of the anger and the vengeance that we have for the other person. And sometimes, in order to forgive, it takes a little bit of a clearer understanding. Sometimes we find out what was going on in the life of the person who inflicted the pain at the time they did it. And it helps us to understand how it happened and maybe why it happened, why the unfair pain was given, what was influencing them, what was going on in the relationship before it started to come all apart. So a clearer understanding, and sometimes that takes years to get to the place where you're willing even to look at it. Anger can last a long time, but it can also slowly go away. Slowly but surely, we discover that we can actually start to hope that the person who hurt us is getting their life together. And we suddenly can realize that we feel good about when we hear reports of that person who caused so much pain, even pain to us, that they're slowly getting their life together and becoming a better person. It's terribly freeing. It's terribly freeing. And I always say to people, if you are starting to experience that, when you can get to that place where you can have the smallest amount of joy when you hear that kind of good news, where you can actually start to pray down a blessing on someone who has caused so much pain and wish them well, not harm, you are swirling in the waters of forgiveness. And also, in order to forgive, it has to come out of love. Pure, unadulterated love. Divine love. Genuine forgiveness, like love, cannot be forced, coerced, or compelled. Why? I don't know why, but I know that's how God operates. God did not force us to love and to serve Him. God does not compel or coerce us. It is our choice, and God allows that freedom, that scary freedom, that volition. And so, in the same way that we can choose to love, we have to choose to forgive. No one can make us do it. It has to come out of pure, divine love. This thing that God instilled into the entire cosmos. And that is why I think, in the end, that we give and receive unfair treatment. Unfair treatment, because love cannot be compelled. Good moral behavior cannot be compelled or coerced. All of it has to come in an atmosphere of love and freedom. and that it is also healed by that same grace of forgiveness. And that's why I am absolutely convinced that Jesus taught his followers to forgive so that they could live in this unfair world with joy and with peace and with emotional freedom, rather than staying locked up in a cage of suffering and victimhood, being permitted to work limited retaliation and vengeance. All of that, I think Jesus understood. It just keeps you locked up in a cage and will keep us from enjoying life to its fullness. And so if we are being faithful to this forgiving Christ, who taught everyone to forgive, who himself forgave while hanging on a bloody cross, then we too must be about the work, the sometimes slow and very difficult work of forgiving those who have caused us pain and heartache. So God bless you. I hope that you will be able to use the things that we have discussed in these two videos, perhaps in your own life, or maybe with someone that you love who's in a situation where they too are trying to work at forgiveness, or knowing that they need to and finding the road to doing that unknown or very, very difficult. So God bless, and may this truth that we have shared together, may it be written on all of our hearts and shared in the world. Thanks.